Well, shalom. This is Pastor Jim with Word Pictures in Ancient Hebrew. Welcome to another edition as we continue to look into the armament that the Apostle Paul spoke of in Ephesians chapter 6. Today we're going to look at verse 14 where he says, "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth." Now, you might remember we started with two initial pieces called the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness. We've dealt with that in two previous videos, and today we want to move on from that. But it's worth noting that he found those two pieces in Isaiah 59, and from there, because of his experience, obviously, of being incarcerated with Roman guards, he began to see this concept of different pieces of armament, and so he speaks to us of wearing the whole armor of God. We're going to move into the third piece today. In verse 14, he says, "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth." It's a very interesting concept. Marla Jean has already talked to you about the word truth, and the word truth speaks of strong water that ties us to a covenant. How does that happen? What does strong water speak of? Well, it's the word im, the root word, aleph mem, and it means mother. And of course, in that cultural setting, they would boil animal hides, and then those hides would be used for just a number of different things in their life. And as a byproduct, the water that they had boiled these hides in would have this real white sticky stuff on the top, and that would be glue. Well, you know how valuable glue would have been in that kind of a cultural setting and lifestyle. And it's the glue that holds our lives together, the glue that attaches us to the covenant of God. And they knew they were in covenant relationship with God. So what a beautiful picture. I want to begin to speak a little bit about this idea of belt or girding or whatever that talks about. As we transpose back from the Greek into the Hebrew and then even further into ancient Hebrew for a pictorial representation of this word, we find the word azar, and it's spelled with three letters, an aleph, a zayin, and a resh. When we transpose those into pictures, the aleph is the ox head, which stands obviously for strength, for first, for leader, that type of thing. The last letter is the letter resh, and that's the picture of a man's head, so it stands for a man. So we're going to talk about something that will strengthen the man. What is it? It's the middle letter. It's the infix that we want to talk about in this word because it gives it such special meaning. It's the letter zayin, and a zayin would have been a mattock. Now, there are different descriptions of a mattock. We can go to Home Depot today and buy a mattock. It's a sledgehammer-looking affair, but it has a blade on one side, and then it has an axe blade, and it has a hammerhead on the other side. And so it's used for a multiple number of things. In this particular setting, the mattocks that is referred to here would probably have been a farm implement, something similar to a plow, and it would be used for turning soil, for preparing the soil to cultivate and to grow things in. And so as you do that, you observe this turning process and you note that the soil is rolling around. And so it's in effect encompassing something, air in this particular instance. But when you apply that principle, that precept, the Apostle Paul is talking about not so much maybe a belt, a single belt, as he is the idea of being enveloped. How do we know that? Well, we need to look at a couple of other things that he refers to and see how this word azar refers to being wrapped or bound or encapsulated, because that's exactly what the truth does to us. In Ephesians chapter 5, just shortly before he does this teaching, he writes these words, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word." He's speaking of the idea, the concept of immersion of baptism, and he's applying that to this marriage. Now, marriage, he explains to us, furthermore, in Ephesians chapter 5, is a mystery. And it's a mystery so that in the world we might see a picture of Christ and his bride. And so how do we do that? We do that by immersing ourselves in a relationship. And so he would have been extremely familiar with this idea of the mikveh, the baptismal, where they would go when it came time to go to the Temple Mount and go through the mikveh in order to be prepared to go to the top of the Temple Mount. However, when the message of Christ comes, we discover that message is there's only one baptism, there's only one mikveh that you need now, and that's the immersion into the name, the character, the association of Jesus Christ. And so this whole concept begins to gel, it begins to come together, and he's looking at this armament and he's thinking about being encapsulated and carrying these weapons with him, and he associates that with truth. What does truth do? Truth encapsulates us in the character of Jesus Christ, of Yeshua. He is salvation, and that's how he does that. He encapsulates and protects us. He literally rolls himself around us in all ways to carry us through life. It's actually a marvelous picture, and it's another example of how God has all of these incredible, hidden, mysterious facets of himself that he only reveals to us as we pursue him, as we dig into his word, and as we ask him to show us more about his character, about his person, about who he is, and how he wants to relate to us. Well, thanks once again for joining me for Word Pictures in Ancient Hebrew. It's great to have you with us today. Until we move on to the next piece of armament, shalom.